You are listening to the Mary Jane Society podcast, where you will meet entrepreneurs, cultivators, scientists, doctors, and inventors in the cannabis industry.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Pam Schmiel. Today's guest is Dr. Avery Gilbert, a sensory scientist with roots in the luxury perfume industry. He's worked with major global brands and now brings his expertise to the cannabis space, helping companies elevate their products through sensory research and R&D. In this episode, we explore what truly defines a luxury product, beyond just price or packaging. From wine to perfume, luxury goods share common threads: craftsmanship, culture, technology, media, retail experience, and the art of blending. Cannabis brands can reach luxury status if done the right way. Let's welcome Dr. Avery Gilbert. So if you just give us your background in perfume.
Okay. Yeah, well, I have a rather weird background. I started out graduate school at the University of Pennsylvania in psychology and was studying rat sex, which is not normally the main highway to the perfume industry, but a lot of animal behavior involves smell, and so that was my specialty. My first human smell paper, if you want to put it that way, was about people being able to smell the difference between different strains of genetically identical mice that only had one gene difference. And people could smell the difference just as the mice could. So that was sort of a man bites dog story, got me a little notoriety. And eventually I came to the attention of the fragrance industry and was hired to a multinational company called Givaudan, based in Paris and Switzerland. And there I became a vice president for sensory psychology. So I was in charge of consumer research and also basic research on human sense of smell. And why do people like what they do? Why are they able to smell what they can or not smell what they aren't able to? And doing that kind of in support of the commercial enterprise, selling fragrances to everything from S.C. Johnson, Procter & Gamble, up to Estee Lauder and Coty and so forth. So it was fine fragrances. It was things like, the dark side of perfumery, like scented incontinence garments for adults. It's like somebody's got to do it. So
right, things you don't think about.
Covered the territory there. Eventually, I left there and became an independent scientific consultant. The internet enables that. So I continued working for companies like that. And then about 10 years ago, moved out to Colorado. I'm in Fort Collins. It's about an hour north of Denver. Cannabis having been legalized for recreational purposes only a couple of years earlier, I was curious, so I visited some dispensaries and just sniffing around, so to speak. My last real experiences with cannabis were, UC Berkeley back in the days of seedy, miserable weed. And
Seedy, yes, seedy, very seedy.
Yeah, we had to get your Led Zeppelin album cover out and separate the seeds so they wouldn't be popping in your face. That was the dark ages.
Yeah.
But what I sniffed at these dispensaries in Colorado was amazing to me. The sheer variety, the width of the spectrum of smell, from skunky ones to citrusy ones to sweet smelling ones, earthy. It was, and having sniffed kind of analytically for a living for many years, it struck me this was a wider array of smell than you get in wine, for example, or coffee, tea, and it rivals that of perfume. I mean, it's an enormous universe of smell. And what was amazing to me is that nobody had mapped it. There was no descriptive system. Nobody had done the first step in consumer studies to see, how do people describe these smells and what are they after when they're purchasing and consuming. So I decided to do it.
So back then you're looking at it which we weren't really, or people in the industry looking at it from a consumer perspective. Like, how does this translate into a product? Because that's what you've been doing. with other products in the perfume industry. So you must have just seen the.
That's right. And we were, in the industry, you tweak a formula so that you appeal to a certain set of consumers where you match a brand concept. But here, the consumer had been left out of it. There was a ton of chemistry work that had been done on cannabis aroma. And so we knew a lot about terpenes, the most common molecule that you find that are aromatic. That's the easy part to extract. It's a huge category of smells. But nobody had mapped it. And I think the reason was because, normally you'd expect university food science departments or maybe even the UC Davis sensory sciences people to have done this. But if universities take the first dollar of federal money from NIH or NSF, the other grant agencies, they're forbidden to have cannabis on campus. So I'm not an academic, and I got together with somebody who is a chemist, Joseph DeVerde, here in Fort Collins at Colorado State University. He had his own private lab as well. So his private lab, my private company, we teamed up and we did the first study of just having regular folks sniff like a dozen different strains and describe them with a checklist, fruity, chemical, skunky, whatever. And it turns out people, number one, are able to do that easily. This isn't some deep mystery, just regular folks. You don't have to be trained. You can just describe what you're smelling if given an opportunity to do so. And the results, you find a couple of big groupings in the smell world. You find the sort of earthy, woody, heavy smells, and you find these fruity, pungent, citrus-like smells. And those two groups of strains kind of separated themselves. So we published that as a paper in PLOS One. That was the first time anybody had taken the responses of just regular people to characterize the smell of different strains.
Where was it published? Where did you publish it?
It's called Public Library of Science, PLOS One. Access, anybody can go and download a copy, and it's written to be accessible to the general audience. So
such a big undertaking, it seems like.
Well, we managed to do it on our own. It's a lot of work. It's not glamorous. It's basic consumer sensory research that you do when you test any other scented product coming to market. We kind of did it on our own.
So it's completed. It's a completed lexicon.
The lexicon. Well, that's an interesting topic because we used about 48 descriptors, different smell words. And as I said, we got nice results, but what we did was repeat the study using a slightly different method, a slightly reduced version of that descriptive list, and got the same results. So we've duplicated this. And that has kind of become de facto a lexicon for the industry. And by a lexicon, I mean just a system of descriptors for the product that experts can agree on and that novices and just regular folks can look at and go, this is what happens in wine, for example. In 1987, Ann Noble at UC Davis published the wine aroma wheel. So it's a round wheel and it has general categories. It's like a dartboard. In the center of general categories like fruit. And then the next circumference out is divisions of that. So you have like stone fruit, tropical fruit, and berries. And then around the edge are the final descriptors, which might be strawberry, blueberry, pineapple, guava, and so forth. And so those descriptors around the edge become a way, if you confine yourself to those words, of accurately describing any wine. And it makes it easier for experts to talk to one another. It makes it easy for quality control to be done in a winery. And it's a way to invite the public in. People who don't know what an oaky Chardonnay is, well, they can smell this one, smell that one, and have examples of how to. Here's an example of an oaky Chardonnay. We put a drop of this chemical in it. You compare, and you go, I understand oaky now. It's no longer a mystery. It's no longer a snob thing.
Maybe that's something, I don't know, that people could even do in dispensaries. is saying, having the farmer come in and start talking about these in relation to terpenes and, educating on that and then the value of those different terpenes. So maybe that's where the problem is, that it's not being universally used. We have the info or we're defining it. Is that maybe?
Well, Verity and I made the first couple of steps in that direction. It's been picked up without credit, but that's okay. If you go to Leafly or Weed Maps, there are lists of descriptors. You can sort strains by aroma descriptors. Those are basically our lists with
Okay.
tiny edits, so which is fine. So it's
Yeah.
getting out there, but there's still the the coffee association, beer drinkers, they have a kind of official um, blessed lexicons, which helps a lot. And so far, there it hasn't been taken up by the cannabis industry. But I think you're right. It would help bring people in. It would help the discussion about what
If we
the
started using that.
take the mystery out of it, and it could also help with advertising. I mean, we go to a wine store, you know, if you don't know quite what you're after, the person at the counter will start talking to you. Well, you want red, white, you want deep, heavy flavor, something light, and from there you kind of wind it down. Or if you know something already, you say, I'm looking for a Pinot Noir from, you know, in this price range. It has a lot of berry fruit in it, and they'll be able to walk you over to two or three different bottles, and you have a choice. And it could be that way in this industry. It's not a unique problem to cannabis. The same thing happens in perfume, where you've got hundreds of new perfumes coming out every year on the market. And even if you like perfumes, but how do you possibly find your way through this universe? And people have come up with maps, charts. Basically, you start with what you might have bumped into and like, and then ask what's similar. So that's another way to go. What's a similar one? So there's some kind of need a map or a genealogy. These have all been produced. Wheels are one way to go. Just because Ann Noble came up with the wine wheel, we now have coffee wheels, beer wheels, tea wheels.
I feel like people are mostly shopping on effects. It's, of course, it's high THC, but it's that's only because that's what they think is giving them the effect. But what if so how would these different smells, how could you, I guess I'm not really sure what I'm asking, but I guess I'm thinking like we're putting emphasis on these smells when people really are coming in for the effect.
Interesting question, because we don't really have solid data on the consumer market. We don't have segmentation data that you'd expect in beer or wine, for example. So people could be buying on the basis of aesthetics. They want a really fruity
Mm.
Chardonnay. They could be buying on the basis of price. It's like, give me the cheapest damn thing on the shelf, please. And they could be buying on potency. So I want, you know, give me a malt liquor 40, or you give me, a vodka in a bucket. I don't, it doesn't matter. So what are the actual proportions of that for cannabis in the recreational market? Kind of unclear, really. Um, and then tying the effect to the different aromas, that's the next step. I mean, what we found with
Yeah, that's the next step.
the kind of woody, earthy herbal set is what a lot of people would think of as indica, and the sweet citrus pungent set would bring to mind sativa for those who know the categories. And that raises a whole bunch of baggage too. I mean, in biological terms, those might have been original land races at one time, but with all the crossbreeding since, the genetics has no relation to indica sativa. I think people expect, they kind of know the heavier versus the more citrus as two basic categories. And my hunch would be that you prefer one or the other. Skunky's not to everybody's taste. In the perfume industry, if we did a test and the consumers are saying, "Oh, there's a skunky note in this," that's like that's like a death sentence for that trial.
Right.
That's there's a manufacturing defect, or it's like that's out. But skunky, turns on some portion of the cannabis consumer base. So fine,
Yeah, it does.
maximize that.
Right. Right. You're right. Right. Yeah, I guess the key is really kind of drilling down on these terpenes and other aromatic compounds that are responsible for what we are feeling, which we're still don't really even know yet. I mean, we don't even have that information. I mean, sure, limonene, maybe, for anxiety.
Well, I mean, a lot of that is based, I think, on the kind of aromatherapy literature from decades back, which derives from herbal medicine in Europe for centuries. Um, and we found that in the consumer product realm as well, where a lot of kind of aromatherapy positioned products um, tie aroma to a mood effect. It's something that I did in the fragrance industry when I was working with Givaudan. We came up with ways to describe scents, describe the odor itself as being energizing or relaxing, rather than this scent has an energizing or relaxing effect on my body. You talk about effects on the body. The FDA is looking over your shoulder, and
Mm, mm, mm,
goodbye.
mm.
So there are ways to maneuver through those kind of claims, and we know very well that certain scents go with certain mood states. So, for example, if I'm designing an energizing shower gel for wake up in the morning, I'm not. I'm going to use citrusy tropical fruits because they have that mood impression. I'm not going to use soft balsamic florals because that's kind of relaxing, romantic, seductive, whatever. I might use that on a pillowcase, a scented, bedclothes center for getting to sleep. That's consistent with that mood direction. But if you want energizing and exhilarating, you stick with the citrus. I mean, this is kind of seat of the pants perfumery that you learn in the business. Um,
And which is universal. Like what you're saying right now, that is universal. Like we all already know that's how that makes us feel.
it's interesting. It's sort of it's these unspoken, unarticulated beliefs that consumers have. How they get there? Were you told that just by experience? I'm not sure what the origins are, but um, these are these implicit beliefs in the marketplace. And I'm sure there's a very specific set of implicit beliefs in the cannabis space too, but they need to be teased out.
Right.
You mentioned one thing. You mentioned the terpenes and the that we're learning more. Everybody had been focused on terpenes as the source chemical for these smells for many years because that was the first and most abundant kind of chemical that comes out of chemical analysis. But that does, I was always saying years back, it's like you can take any combination of terpenes and you can't get from terpenes to skunk. It's not going to happen. Skunky is sulfurous molecules by and large. It's the mercaptans, for example, that are used in the natural gas warning odor. Natural gas is methane, has no smell, so that's why we have to put the warning odor in, and they use the sulfur mix for the skunky thing. It's like, whoa, what's that? Gas leak. So one company that I work with, actually, on scientific advisory board, Abstracts Technologies in Southern California, they started looking more closely from a chemical point of view at these infrequent, low concentration, but very powerful molecules that are usually kind of just don't make it to the radar. And they found a set of 6 of these sulfur containing molecules that have the various skunky notes in them. So finally, it's like, okay, weed can be skunky. These are probably the most likely suspects. That was great. And they followed up in the last couple of years with more papers showing that cheesy notes. Cheese was a descriptor that Verity and I used. I thought, well, we just scraped together words that were used in a lot of smoke reviews online. And cheesy kept showing up. I thought, it's there. Let's see if it works. In
I
fact, it
keep
does
hearing
work.
cheesy. I keep hearing that word lately about just, I wonder if people, and that has to do with,
It's actinoic acid and decanoic acid, which are known to flavor us all over. It's in yogurts, milk, dairy products, cheeses. And if you're going to make a flavored cheese stick cracker, you're going to use those items in it. So they found those. They found abstract salts found the kind of ripe tropical fruit notes like mango and stuff. And these compounds again are no mystery, but they're known to flavorists. But nobody was looking for them. All eyes were sort of on terpenes, and we missed the rest of it. So I think only now are we getting the full view of the chemistry behind cannabis aroma.
Yeah.
I think we're almost there. And this will also help with the lexicon because you can have examples of, cheesy note. All right, well, doctor a plain weed with a couple drops of decanoic acid and bingo, smell this, that's cheesy. People go, now I get it.
So yeah, that's so interesting. I think I heard somebody talking about the cheesy notes in like a really like OG strain, and they were talking about, I think like like it was part of this really good old strain that they all loved, and so I'm just thinking it might be a compound that just has some sort of great effect on your high, like, but that's what we're saying. There's all these other like minor compounds that could be affecting what we're having,
Well, they
what
can affect moods too. The mood thing doesn't need to be limited to terpenes. I know
yeah.
that's the holy scripture of entourage effect is that it's terpenes. Well, there's a lot of other real active compounds, odor active compounds in there, and they also could be putting a mood spin on the experience.
Right. And so I guess so maybe we're now at the point in our technology that we have to figure out how not to lose these other compounds that we're finding that can have such an effect on things. I mean, that must be where what the stage we're at. Because even in our extraction processes, we're just burning things off, and we supposedly from the experts say you can't possibly get every compound that's in there unless you do like a cold water hash or something that's very delicate that doesn't, you know,
Well, now
um,
that we know what we're trying to preserve or what's in there that's important, we can try to preserve it in the processing and not only selecting cultivars that are rich in those compounds, but preserving them through the drying process, through the extraction process. The same thing happened in wine. Um, Again, UC Davis pioneered things like cold fermentation for white wine, which preserved a lot more of those kind of heavy, fruity notes. And so for a while, it was like fruity Chardonnays were kind of overdoing it even, but they were able to salvage those in the venting process, which would have been blown off otherwise. So I think we're seeing a lot of that now in the cannabis industry. People are coming up with much better ways of retaining those volatiles, and it just makes for a richer experience. But again, if you don't talk about it, if you don't promote it,
but I also heard you talk about the importance in blending, in which I feel like this leads into that in blending in the perfume industry, and how we could utilize that more in cannabis, to kind of going off of what we're talking about here. And then just wondering if you could just talk to us about that.
that's the thing I brought up in that article I published in the journal called Luxury. It's a business journal from NYU. And I kind of did a comparative analysis. I said, can we get to luxury products from cannabis? Because right now it's a locally grown, perishable commodity like soybeans. And it's, how do we get to a Chianti Classico designation, or how do we get to you know, Dior Eau Sauvage classic formulation? The commonality in wine and perfume is that you're blending. Even when it's coming from an appellation, a certain part of Bordeaux or the Chianti region in Italy, perfumes the same way. You're taking raw materials from all over the world, but it's the perfumer who's blending them create a certain impression, and the winemaker's doing the same thing. Even from Bordeaux, they're blending Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, and a little Merlot. Three of those in differing proportions depending um, on the facility, the chateau, whatever it might be. that's where you get distinctive and consistent um, wine quality, flavor and aroma. That's the whole art of perfumery since the Renaissance in Italy and France. Um, and that's what's, and then look in beer too. People are now flavoring beer and they're doing all kinds of, it's been for a while now, the craft brewing industry has just been free to experiment and go nuts. And sometimes it works and sometimes it bombs. But when it works really well. That's what we don't have in cannabis. It's like the old 16th century German Reinheitsgebot, the German beer law that you can only use water and hops and barley, and you couldn't put anything else into it. It's like we're still in that stage. It's got to be the pure bud or derived from a pure bud of this strain and maybe at this location. That ties your hands in terms of creativity, in terms of consistency also. Think about the tobacco industry. You know, they they blend burley and Turkish and these different strains, and then they flavor them. And that's how you manage. There's not one tobacco farm big enough to grow everything for Camels or Winstons. Um, but you blend and source from across different sources, and you have a master blender and a flavorist who are keeping it within quality specs. That's how you have a consistent mass-produced product. And it's kind of heresy to say it, but I'll say it. Why couldn't that happen in cannabis?
Right. I think you're right, because there are people who are such purists, in the cultivators are really the where it kind of started in their knowledge and their love for the plant and the buds and
And
trying.
taking nothing away from them. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
they created consistent strains. They promoted certain kinds of aromas and effects through selective breeding. Very cool. The processors have figured out how to, you know, uh, maintain those in the product. But if you went to a blending stance, you'd be able to mass produce a consistent product with a distinctive aroma and effect, perhaps. And in that case, then you've got the basis for a national brand. Short of that, I don't see branding really happening.
To get to that next level, you think we should be blending and adding different flavors and to get to a luxury level that's because people are selling across the country, their products, but with different manufacturers. I'm just kind of thinking about this.
There's no, well, for branding you need consistency and hopefully quality and distinctiveness. And so you can have branded shave creams, which are all you know, propellant and soap suds and some fragrance within narrow character. Um, you could do it maybe if you've sourced nationally, or sourced from more than one grower. It would be doable. You don't even need to flavor it, but that's a possibility. And I think once you get into the vapes, that's where the creativities happen. So vapes can taste like anything. And you have all this kind of, same with shampoos or any other scented product, flavored product. You have fantasy fruit cocktails of all sorts, um, different blends. They can resemble, they can be orange creamsicle.
If you could just like walk us through what is a normal process in a company when you are going through this R&D process, like in the perfume world?
All right. Well, so you have Pam's perfume, and you want to come up with a new SKU for it. So the first thing you do is you write a brief, or have your creative marketing team write a brief. So you want it to be, attractive for the 18 to 28-year-old woman who's sporting, exercises a lot, and is very active and energized. And there'd be a lot of flowery rhetoric around that. That's the brief. You submit that to a couple of fragrance houses, and there's 5 multinationals. There's a lot of smaller ones as well. And what they do, a fragrance evaluator will take that brief and then assign it to a couple of perfumers in-house who will come up with some mods, some creative samples. And the evaluator will go, well, okay, Pierre, that's kind of nice. It's got a sparkly note. It's kind of energizing. Let's use that. Um, you know, Katie, that those two are too kind of sleepy, calm. They don't really speak to the brief. And so there's an internal selection process. There's sometimes some in-house sensory work as well. You hand it around, you have people sniff it in-house and say, does this match? How well does this approximate the brief? Is this a match or not? So you get some kind of sense of what's on target and what's not. And then eventually the evaluator will give one or two of those mods, usually just one, to the salesperson who goes back to you and says, well, here's what we think. And then you've got two or three houses, and so you sample them. And then you go back and say, well, this one's on the mark and this one's not. And there's an iterative process where they tweak it. Usually if you're a big enough client, they will do some consumer research for you. They'll send it out to a consumer panel, have people wear it or try it or sniff it and get their reactions in a measurable way and their responses to it. And so you'll be provided with, well, here's our final formulation. Here's what people in your key 18, 28-year-old active female sporty market think of it. And if it hits the mark, then you'll say, we'll go with that one. So there's input from consumers, from experts inside, iterative adjustments to the formula, and then it goes to market.
Right. So I know that there are a lot of there are food scientists who are kind of jumping that you see are involved in the cannabis industry, formulating like gummies and mostly gummies. I don't think people have really thought about the vapes. I mean, there are some flavored vapes out there, but I feel like you're right. We could, and I'm not talking about the Juul, like those terrible flavored type vapes that were out in the market that, got in a lot of trouble. But so anyway, but what do you think about the different food scientists and how they might apply it, or maybe what they might be missing?
Well, flavors work in the same way. And so if you're making a new snack chip or chewing gum, you'll go through a similar process. So what's happening now in terms of cannabis adjacent consumer products? So you mentioned the gummies as a delivery vehicle. I agree with you. I think they've been creatively underpowered. I mean, first of all, gummies and edibles, it's not an easy task for a flavorist because CBD is very bitter and THC has kind of a trashy taste. So if you got those ingredients in there, you've got a big climb to get around that, to soften that, to kind of take the harshness away or disguise it. So some flavor formulations might be better at that than others. So it's not a trivial problem, but just throwing strawberry flavor into a gel, it's like boring. It's got nothing to do with anything. People who want to get, eating a gummy for, to relieve anxiety or to get ready to go to bed to encourage sleep, they would expect a different set of flavors than just something that you're chewing. This is not a Mentos product. It's not a Wrigley's gum. It's not, it's got a purpose, and you can make flavors that would address that. I think that, and like I said, the creative process that I described hasn't really been fully engaged in cannabis adjacent products, especially the edibles. The other big opportunity, I think, is in beverages, because we've got so many functional beverages now, ones that'll keep you not only just hydrated and keep your electrolytes up, but energizing drinks, restorative drinks. I mean, there might be drinks for yoga, there might be drinks for Pilates. There's, you could really go nuts in the marketing. But they're using terpenes and these other non-terpene aroma and flavor chemicals that are derived or found in cannabis. That could be interesting in terms of claims and in terms of sourcing and kind of authenticity. And I think if it's done well, that could be taken up by some of the bigger drink companies.
You mean mimicking the flavor of a cannabis, its original state, or just you're saying just
using cannabis flavored but not necessarily THC, or maybe has THC, and just you pick up some part of that flavor spectrum from cannabis and you use it in there, and then you've got a kind of intrinsic, kind of natural linkage with cannabis in your that you can use in your product positioning and placement and advertising.
Right, which makes sense to me. I mean, if we're trying to, relate it all together, and you're saying, so based on like a terpene that's dominant in a specific strain that you're using to make your beverage, that you might enhance that somehow to adding terpenes to it, you mean, or
Yeah.
a blend of
Yes. Yeah,
flavors
yeah.
to,
You could do that, but I think you design the drink. If the functional beverage would have a sort of goal, and why people are using it, and you select the terpenes that are kind of consistent with that goal, and so you've got a cannabis-based terpene or cannabis element claim in the drink. And right, it's the opposite of what you said earlier about, people are just basically let's squirt some CBD into RC cola. It's like,
oh yeah, yeah.
it's random. It's just there's no intrinsic connection between the sourced molecules and what people think about them and the final beverage, the final product. But it
Right,
could be. That's an unlimited
right.
creativity potential there.
Right. So, in your article, I really like how you looked at the bigger picture of what it takes to create a luxury brand, and in other industries. And one of the things that you were talking about, so I'm thinking about it as if somebody's really trying to create a true, authentic cannabis luxury brand, what they need to think about. So the things that we just spoke about. But in addition, you also talked about the retail presence of where these products sell, and just wanted to have you talk about that a little bit, how that influences the product.
Yeah, I think in the article I kind of described the three tiers of dispensaries. There's kind of the bodega style corner shop, which has absolutely no curb appeal, or is legally prevented from having any curb appeal. You walk in and it's just crowded. There might be a poster, but that's about it. It's kind of unadorned. Um, there are larger ones. They're kind of like big box retailers. It's like going into the Best Buy of cannabis, and it's bright lights and 300 yards of counter space, and a
Yeah,
little bit overwhelming unless you know what you're looking for. And then there were finally the top tier were these sort of boutique like um, dispensaries that aspired to be like the Apple stores of weed, and MedMen, for a while it was existing, was trying to push that concept, which was very kind of high end, which is a nice idea, but it's expensive to maintain and margins aren't great in this business. So I think that's kind of faded, although you can still get kind of a more custom level of service at a more boutique end thing. It's like, Avery, we're ready for you now. What can we do for you? It's kind of a little more elegant approach than just next.
set. I feel like a lot anyway in New York City I feel like they spent all their money on their licensing and all the other stuff it took to get that up and running. That display cases. That's really it. A display case with a back wall. They might have some big mural, but that is it. There's nothing.
You're not expecting a kind of deluxe experience in there. You're not expecting personalized service. It should be, I mean, one possibility would be more like the fragrance counter at Macy's or Nordstrom's, Bloomingdale's. The lady there, usually a lady, is eager to sell you anything in the counter, not just one brand. And you can sample, and she'll kind of, invite you, you know, solicit from you what you're after, what you like, what you've had good success with, what you don't like about what you're wearing now, and spritz one or two wrists, walk away for a few minutes, think about it, and come back and make a purchase. That's the classic way, and that's more inviting. It's still a counter. It's still illuminated case with product, but you've had an experience that's interactive and inviting.
Also talk about the lack, as far as building a luxury cannabis brand, the lack of the media infrastructure that we need to present it or to direct the consumer perception of a luxury product. And
Yeah, I mean, if you look at wine and tobacco, you've got Cigar Aficionado, you've got Wine Spectator. You used to have High Times, and then I guess they just kind of blew up or crumbled, or I'm not sure what the story was there, but there's no longer one magazine you can pick up. Magazines in general are kind of fading, and the kind of full service critique, review based, uh, um, connoisseur level publications or online even aren't don't really seem to be there. So I think that's a, a missed opportunity for the industry to reach out to customers. You could at least educate yourself before you go into the dispensary, get in line, and feel all the pressure. You'd kind of have a sense of what you're after and
mhm,
what you want to sample. Um, in the perfume industry, perfumes always used to be advertised in what we used to call the women's books, Vogue, Glamour, Cosmopolitan, but print, and they used to advertise with the scratch and sniff samples. That was a huge moneymaker for those magazines. It kept them afloat. They've disappeared. Print's disappeared.
yeah,
So that whole advertising, that's fallen off a bit with the dot-com age. But from about 2000 to about 2010, 12, there was a flourishing online of perfume blogging, fragrance blogging. People would just start writing about their fragrance preferences and experience, and it became a thing. It was this kind of online community. People talked back and forth. I was kind of into that. I've met people in real life from there, but the whole blogging thing kind of peaked and went down. So I'm not sure where one finds out about fragrance now.
mm,
Um, and I think a similar evolution is kind of to be expected with cannabis. Um, you know, you're you're doing podcasts. I think that seems to be that's today's blogging. Um, it's got wider audiences. Maybe that's the future.
right.
Um, but there's no authoritative source as there was with high. I don't know if you call High Times authoritative necessarily, but a wine spectator like analog would be nice.
And I know there is a new magazine that just launched in Los Angeles called High, and
Okay.
they're like a lifestyle, not strictly cannabis, but it's just Los Angeles based. So it's like the Los Angeles lifestyle, but it's infused with cannabis. So it's really kind of presenting it in this, and it looks really good, and and then there's another one, out there, Fat Nugs Magazine, but that's more, I feel like stoner, like industry people who, OG. So it's not, there's nothing like on the national level. There's a
Um,
lifestyle magazine in the New York area. I feel like when you think of fashion and perfume and luxury products, you think of these glossy magazines that support.
we have to recognize that it's not a stoner culture anymore.
It's almost too early for the luxury products. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you'd ever heard of the Luxury Meets Cannabis conference that was here in New York for like 3 or 4 years. And I was just looking them up recently because I hadn't really heard that every year they would have a conference, and they haven't had a show in a couple of years. So it kind of and they never had any cannabis products there because they're dealing in more like the Nordstroms and the bigger high-end stores, Bergdorf's or whatever, products that would go into there, and the buyers from those type of places would be there. So they're not selling gummies or things like that. But anyway, but it kind of also shows you how luxury really didn't move yet in the cannabis industry, given they haven't even been around for having a show for 2 years. Though I did just see on their, I think, LinkedIn company page, something about in the process of being acquired, or something like that. So somebody who's bigger is thinking, okay, maybe it's time to bring in luxury cannabis under whatever umbrella. They didn't say who's doing what, but that's what it kind of signals to me is happening.
Well, maybe direct from commodity to luxury is too big a leap, but uh, the intermediate stage is kind of a nationally recognized brand, or at least regionally recognized brand. And until you have that, you can't differentiate on the basis of luxury, but you got to have some kind of branding. And then, who knows, that it might be, there are plenty of luxury goods houses out there that might just pick up uh, such a brand, and then by association it becomes a luxury. But it's got to be branded first, and that hasn't happened yet. Even with the personalities, we went through a celebrity perfume phase beginning in like 1987 with Elizabeth Taylor, and then went to Britney Spears, and there's some Paris Hilton had many successful perfume launches. So that was a thing that's kind of faded now, but you still have famous people as the face of products. Johnny Depp, for a new Dior men's fragrance, and so forth. There have been attempts at personalities, the Willie Nelson stuff. But again, unless you have a kind of national reach with the product itself, it's kind of a self-limiter.
Yeah, I don't know what happened to that Willie Nelson. You would just think that would have been the perfect combination. Maybe they just didn't have the branding muscle behind them, or marketing. I'm not really sure.
And we need more spokesmen in the industry, spokespeople, if you want to be that way. The wine industry in California had Robert Mondavi, who had his own vineyard, his own set of brands, but he also promoted the industry as a whole and promoted California wine as being the equal of anywhere else in the world: France, Australia, Italy. And he was kind of a kind of guiding light for the industry, and just an honored elder, sort of. And there probably are people out there. They haven't emerged from the shadows yet.
And the opportunities. There's still really a lot of opportunity.
A lot of opportunity. Yep.
Right? Like with even retail stores that we could develop, we need the tech to get us to saving all these minor compounds that are beneficial. The blending that you're talking about, that's such a huge opportunity to take from the luxury industry, and like you were mentioning in the vapes and flavor profiles and things like that. And the media, I mean, it's a tough business to get in now, but I don't know, trying to build that brand. And then the celebrity aspect, like we've kind of fallen on that, but like you said, we need a spokesperson. Somebody could really step up and start pushing things like that. So is there anything else that maybe you wanted to say, or what you're looking to do?
There's possibility at every level, from the technical to the marketing, to the merchandising, to the formulating, and to the communicating. And so people need to strike out on that. We'll see what develops.
Thank you, Dr. Gilbert.
You're welcome. Thank you.